Star Trek Strange New Worlds 3 The Bottom Line by Andrew Drew Morby. The burning bridge lacked the acrid smell that should have been there, but that did nothing to lessen Nog's urge to hide under the captain's chair or flee the bridge. On the screen, 2 Cardassian Galar-class vessels converged on a defenseless freighter, while the other 2 continued to pummel a ship.
Tactical officer, report. What is the condition of the Kobayashi Maru?
There was no response. Nog turned and saw the tactical officer laying on the floor, severe burns covering his upper body. He turned back to the screen, trying to reroute tactical controls to his seat, but the computer stalled in transition. The freighter exploded into a nova of color so bright Nog had to look away. How many civilians dead? He tried to call out orders, but his throat was closed, and all that came out was a high squeal. Then the bridge flashed and was replaced by the lines of the Starfleet Academy recreational holodeck. The bitter taste of defeat, but then you should be used to that by now, Ferengi. A laughing voice startled Nog, and he turned to confront the intruder. Human, tall, muscular, and standing in the doorway. Nog decided it wasn't worth it. His holodeck time was up in any case, so he walked past the still laughing man and left the room. "How'd you like my little program?" the fair-haired Gerard Lefebvre asked Nog as they sat in the academy cafeteria. Nog preferred eating in the quad, where proximity to other cadets wasn't necessary, and he could eat without wondering what everyone was thinking. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, that option wasn't feasible.
It was horrible,
Nog said in a low voice as he nibbled on the corner of something Gerard called a croque-monsieur, a melted mass of bacteria-treated dairy product on a slab of bread completely inadequate to the task of holding it together. Someone else had called it an open-faced sandwich, and Nog couldn't see how closing it could possibly hurt. "Blew up the ship?" Gerard asked, and Nog glared at him. "Your turn for the real thing comes up tomorrow. Not much time to prepare." Nog nibbled on the bread, and Gerard laughed. Nog knew the Frenchman was laughing at him, but it was a friendly laugh and didn't carry the stinging derision of the other cadets. "You wanted a human meal?" Nog looked at him.
It's good.
Gerard laughed again and shook his head. "Even if I didn't speak standards so well, I can tell you were lying." Nog found humans difficult to read, and he found Gerard's perceptiveness disturbing. He took a big bite to disprove his friend's words, but spit it out immediately, making the Frenchman laugh more. Maybe there were some universal signals after all. "How are my 2 favorite cheaters doing?" Kyrie asked, smiling as she sat down with him. Kyrie was bald, as all Bolians were, and Nog found it strangely comforting, his own species being mostly hairless. "Cheaters? How could you say such a thing? We're merely taking advantage of all our available resources. Right, Nog?" Of course, the Bolian's ears were a little small, but they seemed perfectly proportioned nevertheless, and of course they were unlikely to grow any hair as she got older either. "Isn't that a rule of acquisition?" Gerard prompted, nudging Nog with his foot. "Maximize your resources or something?"
Something like that,
Nog replied.
How was your morning class, Kyrie?
Even her name had the ring of latinum to Nog's ears. The Bolian turned to look at Nog. "Self-defense class." Her face made a sour pout. How good could it be? Nog tried to emulate her expression.
I've got it after lunch.
Just one more opportunity for him to look foolish in front of his fellow cadets. Kyrie turned back to Gerard. "What are you doing after lunch?" "Studying, I guess." He glanced over at Nog. "Unless Nog wants to skip class to take another run at the Maru simulation before tomorrow." "Perfect, we can study together," Kyrie said. Nog desperately wished he could cut self-defense, but the teachers at the academy gave him less leeway than they did for Gerard, who did what he wanted with no ill effects.
I can't.
"Okay," Gerard said, turning to look at Kyrie. "It's a beautiful day. Why don't we study in the quad area?" Her smile disappeared for a moment and flickered back, and she nodded. The self-defense class was held in one of the large gymnasiums on the academy campus. Nog stood in his Starfleet whatever. Nog stood next to Yora Elmark, who had the dubious distinction of being the second shortest cadet in the class. She made up for it, though, with her endless elan. No task daunted her, and Nog envied that energy. She smiled at him. "Don't worry, Nog. I won't pin you again." She kept her voice low.
"Unless you want me to." "I appreciate that."
Nog had no desire to be embarrassed like that again. The instructor, a stony-faced Vulcan, paced the mat on the floor in front of the cadets. Despite the mild tone associated with Vulcans, his voice carried like the explosion of a photon torpedo. "Today we will learn about postures." He spun toward the cadets, an uncharacteristically cruel expression on his face, and let out a shout that sent Nog backpedaling into Yora. The sound of shuffling feet assured Nog that others were also taken unaware. The Vulcan's face returned to its carved expression. "Putting your opponent off guard can be a powerful tool. If you act the aggressor, you can induce your opponent into the role of victim." The instructor strolled off the mat. "Begin your routine now, but at some point attempt to catch your partner off guard." Nog looked at Yora. She shrugged and moved to their spot on the mat. Nog liked sparring with her. She was friendlier than most of the cadets, and she didn't seem at all put off by being matched with him. At least until last week, when she broke out their sparring routine, throwing him to the floor and pinning him. The other students had found that entertaining until the instructor ordered extra laps for everyone. Best to stay away from the topic of Kyrie this week, as apparently Yora's views on the Bolian's beauty didn't match up with his own. Halfway through their first set, Nog decided it was time to make his move. He pictured the face of an angry Klingon and attempted to mimic it as he yelled and made a bold move forward. Yora fell backward onto the mat as planned, but instead of cowering in fear, she laughed. The entire class stopped their exercises. His ears roared with embarrassment and he fled. "Nog, wait!" Yora called after him. Nog was already to the door, but before it closed, he heard her add, "Stupid, stupid, stupid!" So much for her being nice. Good thing she forgot about his Ferengi hearing, or he wouldn't know what she really thought of him. He went straight for the recreational holodecks. With his return to Deep Space Nine on a cadet field study imminent, he spent the rest of the afternoon focused on his only remaining hope of proving himself to his classmates.
Gerard, I think I did it. I figured out how to beat the Kobayashi simulation."
Nog burst into the room he shared with the Frenchman, his enthusiasm dying immediately as Gerard and Kyrie unclenched and broke off their kiss. "It's not," Gerard began, but he couldn't finish. Instead, he hung his head and stared at the floor. "What's the matter?" Kyrie asked. "Surely you've seen your roommate kiss a woman before." She looked back and forth between the two friends.
"Sorry to intrude,"
Nog said and stepped back, letting the door close in front of him. At least he had his solution. Even if the real thing turned out to be a little different, it would work. It had to. Once again, he stood on the bridge of his own ship.
"This is too soon."
His time was up. His instructor ignored him and stepped forward. "Today we will be doing something a little different."
"Different?"
Nog's ears focused on the speaker.
"Different how?"
"Instead of a standard holo crew, we're going to use fellow cadets. Let me introduce you to Commander Yora, your first officer." Nog turned and stared straight into Yora's dark eyes, a stab of panic piercing his heart and making his skin taut and brittle. "And this is your tactical officer, Lieutenant Lefebvre." Nog's head swiveled and his eyes widened. "And your helmsman, Lieutenant Kyrie." Nog nearly fell off the center seat when she turned around and nodded to him. "You know your mission. Begin." The four instructors disappeared.
"Helm, lay in our course and engage at cruising speed,"
Nog said, and settled himself into his chair. Nothing happened.
"Helm, lay in a course to patrol the Cardassian border."
Again, no response. Angry, he looked at Kyrie, but she continued to ignore him, her attention focused on something behind him. Nog turned to see she was looking at Gerard, and he stared right back at her.
Commander, please see that these lieutenants are replaced immediately.
Yora just grinned at him.
Commander, now!
Yora started to laugh. Nog pushed himself from his seat to do it himself and fell onto his face on Duracrete. It took him a few moments to reorient himself and wake up enough to realize he was in the quad on a bench, or he had been on the bench. Now he was on the cold, slightly damp walkway. He'd fallen asleep on the bench the night before. "Rough night?" a gravelly old voice asked. Nog scrambled to his feet, trying to smooth out his cadet's uniform and salute at the same time. "Don't stand on ceremony with me, boy," the voice continued. "I've seen as many cadets sleep out here as I've planted flowers." Nog relaxed slightly and looked toward the sound of the voice and saw Boothby, the gardener, standing hip-deep in shrubbery, a pair of large manual clippers in his hands. "What's the matter? Your roommate prefer a woman's company to yours?" Nog nodded. "Typical cadet behavior. Think with their hormones instead of their brains. And the next you know, we're giving them ships of their own so they can gallivant around the galaxy, impressing potential mates." Nog didn't know what to say, but keeping quiet had worked fairly well, so he kept his mouth shut and watched the old man talk and prune. "I've seen you around. You're the one who doesn't fit in, right?" Boothby turned his eyes on Nog. They were similar to Captain Sisko's when he was angry, and Nog hadn't stood up well under Sisko's gaze either. Nog started to nod again, but Boothby cut him off. "Poppycock, you're no worse than any of them. Idic. You know what that is, boy?" Hesitantly now, Nog nodded again. "Well, or don't you know how to speak?"
It stands for infinite diversity and infinite combinations. The Vulcans first use it in the year...
Stop. I didn't ask you to recite your lessons. Do you know what it means?" Nog felt his head start to bob up and down and stopped it short. "What?" Nog considered for a moment.
That everyone is an equally valuable part of the whole?
Boothby laughed. "Are you asking me?" He didn't wait for Nog to respond. "I like you, son, so I'll help you out." Nog's entire attention was on the elderly gardener. "To thine own self be true." Nog blinked.
That's it?
"That's Shakespeare's, son." Then when that didn't help, Boothby added, "Be yourself, you'll do fine." And that, whether or not Nog liked it, was all the gardener had to say. He turned back to his trimming, leaving Nog alone in the quad. 2 hours and a sonic shower later, Nog stood looking up at the front of the testing building from behind a tree. He was going to fail. He was going to kill his crew and the civilians on board the Maru. He took a deep breath. His fears were getting to him. He had a plan, a good plan. He was going to walk in there and show them all. He wished Jake were here for support. He took a hesitant step forward. "There you are. Wait." Yora bounded up to him. "It's probably too late, but I want to wish you good luck." Surprised, Nog started to say something, but she shut him up by grabbing his ears and kissing him solidly. "Good luck." Slowly, she let him go, leaving Nog a little dazed. I watched you hiding over there, and you seem to need some confidence, so I thought I'd remind you that you're uniquely special, the only one of your kind ever to even attempt Starfleet Academy, much less succeed as you're doing. So, good luck." Her face suddenly turned red, and she turned away and bounded off. Nog wished he had time to go after her, to ask her to clarify what she meant, but he couldn't afford to be late. He did feel better, though, and with a renewed energy and a broad smile, Nog entered the test building. Gerard was waiting for him outside the testing room. He glanced at the time on a wall display as Nog approached. "You're going to be late, but I want to apologize for my actions. You must have a clear head when you take the test, no?" Nog tried to interrupt his friend and say things were all right, but Gerard wouldn't let him. "No, listen to me. I know you like Kyrie, but I let her get me alone and I goofed." Something about Gerard's pronunciation tickled Nog's funny bone, but he kept a straight face as his friend continued. "After you showed up, I regained my senses and told her, 'No, you are my friend, Nog, and my actions caused you harm. I am sorry. I'm from France.'" He stuck out his hand, and Nog recognized the gesture. He took the hand and shook it.
I understand, Gerard.
He tried his best to pronounce his friend's name appropriately, but thought, forget it.
She is a beautiful woman.
That she is, Gerard smiled broadly, but then regained control and pronounced, I will not see her again. It's all right. Kyrie seemed a lot less important now than she had the night before.
I don't mind.
Gerard slapped him on the back. Good luck, mon ami. Nog nodded and stepped into the testing room. This is the Kobayashi Maru. Hull has been breached. Mines, please help. The eerie voice of the desperate freighter captain sent chills through Nog, and he grabbed the armrest for support and reminded himself that he had a plan.
Location?
The blue Andorian tactical officer, a full lieutenant, worked as consul for a moment. Across the Cardassian border, Captain. Nog's ears rushed with the sound of his own blood pumping. Captain Nog smiled.
Check the registry for any vessels named Kobayashi Maru. Helm, prepare a course and be ready to engage.
The pretty red-haired ensign at the helm console turned to give him a look, but nodded and entered the course. Captain, it's my duty to inform you that crossing the Cardassian border is a violation of...
I'm aware of that.
Nog cut off his Vulcan executive officer and then hesitated as he couldn't recall her name.
Number 1.
Her eyes didn't register the slight, but she acknowledged him. It's a large freighter licensed under Federation registry, Captain, the Andorian reported. Almost 100 crew. 100 Federation citizens balanced against the almost 1,000 crew on his ship. No contest.
Helm, engage warp 9.4.
Captain, that's over the suggested maximum. The helmsman turned again, her hair sliding enticingly across her neck. Nog tried to remain focused.
Engage, ensign. Tactical. Wideband signal. State our intentions to aid the freighter and request assistance.
Yes, sir. This was all window dressing. None of these gambits had paid off in simulation, but they were the right thing to do. Captain, we are crossing the border now, the Vulcan said. Soroya. Nog finally remembered that was her name. Nog moved up to the front of the bridge to stand behind the helmsman, who didn't look at him.
Ensign, we may be violating a few protocols in order to try and save these people's lives. I would like to do it as quickly as possible. Understand?
Her shoulder relaxed slightly, and she gave him a slight smile. Aye, sir.
Good.
Nog moved back toward his seat.
Lieutenant, prepare the tractor beam and lock onto the freighter as soon as we are in range.
Captain, the freighter has suffered severe structural damage. It might not be able to withstand the stress. Nog considered a moment, noting several functionaries moving around the rear of the bridge, another detail omitted from the practice test.
Lieutenant, do you want to stay here any longer than is absolutely necessary?
No, sir. The tactical officer straightened and obeyed. Nog felt the Vulcan's eyes on him as he moved around. If he didn't know the administrators of the test were hidden cleverly by holographic illusion, he would have taken her for one of them, watching and grading him. Entering the Maru system now, Captain, Harrell reported from the helm. Shall we slow down? Captain, the tactical officer barked. Nog had to hold on to his seat to keep from jumping. Incoming ships, 4 of them.
Don't slow down, Ensign. Lieutenant, hail them.
We're being jammed, Captain, Torbish replied. Nog nodded, expecting that.
Okay, adjust course 5 degrees and head for the star.
Ships are Cardassian make, Gaylor class? The Andorian's antennae quivered.
You!
Nog pointed at one of the officers at the rear of the bridge.
Help out at tactical.
The Andorian stiffened, but Nog didn't have any time to explain. The bridge rocked under the Cardassian opening barrage, but it wasn't serious enough to dislodge Nog's grip on his chair. Minimal damage. Shields holding.
Helm, take us around the sun and plot an exit vector away from the freighter.
Are we going to leave the civilians? Nog imagined his first officer's eyebrow raising, but kept his eyes fixed on the screen. 2 vessels are following, Captain. Only 2? If the other 2 went after the freighter, his plan was over. The other 2 are moving to intercept our exit vector. Nog relaxed slightly, tasting a trickle of blood from his unclenched teeth.
Full shields forward.
Shall I arm weapons? The Andorian asked. On the screen, the sun loomed large as the ship shot around it and then disappeared, replaced by 2 intercepting Cardassian ships.
Alter course for the Maru, now!
Interceptors are firing. The ship shook again as she altered course, and the lights dimmed, then returned.
Do not return fire.
Shields down to 40%, routing power from non-essential systems, the Andorian reported. But Nog wasn't listening. He focused on the second man at tactical.
Ready the tractor beam.
Captain, at this speed, that action will tear the freighter apart, Soraya said in that infuriating Vulcan calm. Nog ignored her too, looking at the Andorian.
Prepare to extend shields to support the Maru. Cut all power except for tractor, shields, and engines.
He locked gazes with his tactical officer.
Including weapons.
The Andorian's antennae stiffened, but he complied. The bridge was silent for a moment. Captain, even if this does work, towing the freighter will allow the Cardassians to catch us. The Vulcan voice of reason sliced through his confidence. 2 of the vessels couldn't possibly catch them, having slowed to ambush him. Unfortunately, Nog realized that Soraya was right. The drag of the Maru on the Venture would allow the other 2 to catch him. Another detail the test program had missed, but he should have known better. And now it was over, and he'd failed again. We're in tractor range, Captain. The words rang hollowly in Nog's ears. He looked around at the faces of the crew he had just killed. They looked back at him expectantly.
Activate tractor and extend shields,
he ordered. If they hadn't given up on him, then he couldn't either. Aye, sir. Nog watched the freighter on the screen, expecting it to explode into a bright rainbow-colored fireball. It didn't. We've got it, Captain. 2 Cardassian ships closing in. They will be in tactical firing range in 5 minutes. The other 2 are still a few minutes behind them.
Time to the border.
Maybe 9 minutes, Captain, if power remains at current levels. They still weren't going to make it. Nog cast around for any inspiration and heard Boothby's voice like a delayed echo in his ears.
Be yourself. Commander, prepare transporters for beaming.
Captain, even if we had power to spare, we wouldn't be able to evacuate them all before the Cardassians reach us.
Not for them, us. Beam our engineers first to try and contain their leaks and get their shields online.
There was a moment of silence, but his crew didn't wait to hear his arguments this time. Nog smiled grimly to himself. That was something, at least. After giving the orders, Commander Soraya turned back toward him. Are we going to stay and fight?
Not exactly.
She stared at him, but he couldn't take the time to elaborate to her he was working on a new plan. He gave his orders, and the crew went to work. 30 seconds, Captain, Lieutenant Torbish said from tactical. Nog tapped his communications badge.
Ensign Harrell, status report.
Captain, she'll handle like a torpedo without guidance control, but the hull breach has been contained. The red-haired navigations officer answered from the helm of the Maru.
Good luck.
At least one of them might survive.
Release the Maru and come about.
His crew responded. Send them our offer. Sending surrender message, but we're still being jammed.
All stations, play dead and ready the bottom line.
Everything went dark. Only the consoles shined an eerie light on their operators. Would the Cardassians take the bait and let the Maru go? Nog hoped that his offer, a Galaxy-class vessel in exchange for the freighter, would be enough. They're firing! The ship rocked, and Nog was jostled out of his chair. Weapons offline, Torbish said as the ship shook again. Right warp nacelle is gone. They're taking us apart, piece by piece. Nog could tell that the Andorian wasn't comfortable not fighting back, but he kept his antennae in check.
They don't want to fall for a trap,
Nog said, crossing his fingers, as Jake had taught him, for luck. Surrendering a Federation vessel to the enemy is a serious offense, Commander Soraya told him, but her words sounded hollow. Only one ship, firing again. That meant the other one was probably still chasing the Maru. It all came down to greed. The bridge exploded in flames. Smoke invaded his nostrils and filled the bridge as he rolled on the floor.
Report!
He called out, but there was no response. He glanced at his chair. It seemed far away, but he crawled toward it. A high-pitched sound filled the air, and a Cardassian in full battle array materialized between him and his chair, weapon firing into where the captain should have been. Nog gathered his legs under him, and as the Cardassian turned toward him, he launched himself at the invader. A fierce shriek erupted from his lips, and he knocked the startled Cardassian over. Instead of taking advantage of his opponent's momentary surprise to finish him, Nog rushed to his chair and triggered the bottom line. 5 seconds to auto-destruct, the ship's computer announced. At the lowest setting Nog and his crew had been able to manage when they'd rewired the system. Only his ears could pick it up, he hoped. 3. More Cardassians beamed onto the bridge. If he recalled his Cardassian tactics correctly, the explosion would hit them with their shields down, and maybe the explosion would pull the other ship off the Maru, allowing the freighter to coast to the border. Maybe. 1. The holodeck exploded in white silence and was slowly replaced by the grid lines of the holodeck. Nog blinked. He'd forgotten that he was in a simulation. He felt a pang for his crew and then noticed the 4 instructors standing just in front of the exit, behind where the rear of the bridge would have been. Nog walked slowly toward the exit. One of the instructors, a tall black man who vaguely reminded Nog of Cisco, stepped forward. Interesting tactic, cadet. You blew up your ship without firing a shot in self-defense, sacrificing your crew in the process.
Did they make it?
Nog asked. You're dead. You'll never know. Do you have an excuse for your actions? Again, Boothby's words rang in his ears.
An excuse? No, sir, but I had to be true to myself.
The instructor raised an eyebrow.
My people have a saying. If, for some reason, you don't want to sell, set the price as high as possible.
Nog lifted the slimy invertebrate to his lips and slurped it down, enjoying the smacking sound it made as well as the slickness with which it slid down his throat.
Oh, I missed these.
There he is. Gerard slid into a seat at Nog's table. He leaned over the bowl of gree worms and sniffed. Mon Dieu!
They're good. Try one.
If this is how you feel about le croque monsieur, you're a better man than I. Nog snared another of the succulent worms and popped it into his mouth, unabashed by Gerard's face. There was no more point in trying to fit in, so he could once again enjoy his favorite delicacy. Did you tell him yet? Yor bounded up to their table. No, I was watching him eat. Taking notes? Nog realized there was something going on that he didn't know about.
Razor-tooth gree-worm?
He offered. Yora's tongue exploded out of her mouth and she made a loud gagging noise.
Never!
Nog picked up another one and inspected it. He's so calm, Yora said. The model of a Starfleet cadet, Gerard said. Maybe that's why everyone is talking about the Nog negotiation.
The what?
Nog almost choked on his worm. That's what the grapevine is calling your Kobayashi Maru test results. Nog felt his skin burn with added heat and excitement.
Results are out?
Yora and Gerard exchanged a glance. You could say that. Hey, Nog, good job on the Kobayashi test. Nog looked and saw one of his classmates wave as he crossed the quad. You're Nog? A brunette from a nearby table turned around and looked him over. How about helping me study later? He'll be busy, Yora interrupted before Nog could answer.
I will?
Yes, you haven't said 2 words since you took the test. I'm starting to think you don't like me. Gerard looked a little startled, but Nog saw a small smile creep across his lips as he looked from Yora back to Nog. You didn't say anything to me also. Why would anyone want to talk about blowing up his ship? Though perhaps he hadn't done quite as badly as he'd feared.
What are they saying about my test?
He asked. Inspired, Gerard said. Showed initiative and good command skills, Yora added. Nog just nodded at his friend's comments, though inside his thoughts were spinning. What would his father say? He would have to thank Boothby. Maybe his grandmother could send some Ferengi flowers for the gardener in her next care package. Don't you have anything to say for yourself? Gerard asked. Nog popped the last worm into his mouth and bit down, enjoying the soft explosion of taste that filled his mouth. Gree worm dusted with the intoxicating flavor of success.
Delicious!